A friend and colleague, Francesca Ferrando, was actually the one who uncovered in the state archives in Genoa this kind of fragmentary documentation on an institution that had been, as far as I know, completely forgotten by the historiography that existed in the Republic of Genoa during the early modern period. And it was called the Magistrate of Virtues. And it was an institution that was specifically tasked with punishing the crime of sodomy. And in this documentation for the punishment of sodomy, I found this overrepresentation of Muslims, actually. So in a period in which Muslims represented less than 1% of the population in Genoa, they represented more than 10% of the cases of the people prosecuted in these cases by this institution. And then I looked at similar documents in Civitavecchia, which was the port town of Rome at the time, and I found a similar overrepresentation, and also some particularities in these cases, which I found very hard to explain. The first one was that all of these cases involved one Muslim man and one Christian man. There were never any cases involving Muslim women nor two Muslim men together. And the second characteristic that I found difficult to interpret was that in every single one of these cases, incredibly, the Muslim was being tried as what is called in the documents as the active partner or the penetrating partner. And the Christian was being tried for being the so-called passive partner. And so it became clear to me increasingly that what was at stake here, what these authorities were concerned with, was the control and monitoring and disciplining of the sexualities and also the gender behavior of their Christian male subjects. When it comes to the history of relations between Christians and Muslims in early modern Europe and in the early modern Mediterranean, so there is this idea in our popular culture that this is an interaction that largely began with the colonial encounter, or even with migration in the 20th century, or perhaps earlier through war and the Crusades, Muslim Spain, the Crusades in the Levant. But a lot of historians, such as notably I think of Josine Dakhlia, the Tunisian French historian, have shown how there is a much longer and much continued, protracted history of cross-confessional interaction in the Mediterranean. And another thing that this documentation reveals is really the intimate relations between Muslims and Christians within early modern Europe. That the Muslim was not just this mysterious and distant other that was represented in theater, but could often be, as I show in the article, the tavern keeper, the innkeeper, in the context of domestic slavery, lived in the same household. So that's, I think, the first takeaway that I'd like people to think about. And then the other key takeaway for me, and it's something that I wish to pursue in my next project as well, is the importance of kinship in these societies and the wide variety of kinship arrangements that existed in comparison to what is considered a normative idea of family today in our society. And that's actually what's the most bewildering when you look at this documentation, how unfamiliar it is, how queer it is to us. But I found it important to kind of highlight these cases in the sources that I found of people acting as family, of these men feeding each other, visiting each other when one is in the hospital, when one is in prison, bringing provisions to each other when one is in prison, taking care of each other, writing letters for each other, expressing forms of physical intimacy, which were not purely sexual, but also public forms of intimacy, such as the hug, the kiss, which were, let's say, normal between men in early modern Italy, but when they occurred across these religious lines, they aroused scorn and suspicion and repression.